And I'm sitting there going, well, I wonder if I have a job. I wonder what the big announcement's going to be today. And the CEO at the time, was it Mark Duffel? I can't remember. Said, yes, and we're all going to be building this new ICE 3 thing on all the stuff I was doing. And everybody around the table was, hey, congratulations, Bart. Why didn't you tell me? And I said, I didn't know.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 5 of the EpiUsers podcast. Today I'm flying solo because my co host Bryan is actually on vacation. So we're allowing him to take the day off. So you are stuck with just me. Um, a couple of things to cover this week and then a fun interview that hopefully everybody will enjoy. The first thing I wanted to cover is the confusion that has been going out there for a few weeks now since Insights about whether or not Epicor is going to force everybody to go to the cloud come 2024. And I think that was just a misconception that somebody heard when they were talking about the timeline to move everybody to the Kinetic UI. As far as I know, and I actually have asked several executives at Epicor, there is no plans to force everybody to go to the cloud by 2024. Right. Lisa Pope did an interview last week on DG No America magazine where she explicitly spoke about the flexibility of running things on premise and how Epicor supports both modes. We're going to put a link to that on the show notes so you can see it. We've also spoken to Stephen Edginton and we've spoken to a couple of other people at Epicor, and they all say at the moment there don't appear any plans for that. Now that could possibly change in the future, but at the moment that doesn't appear to be the case. And frankly, from a user perspective, I don't see that happening anytime soon. They have a ton of accounts that are run on premise. We pay maintenance, we move forward. So eventually, we will probably all end up on the cloud at some point. I imagine longer timeline, maybe 10 years down the road. That would make sense for most people. But you have people that have compliance issues. You have people that have applications that are legacy application things that will not work with something like a cloud system. You have a bunch of security issues. I don't feel comfortable yet running my ERP, all my data in the cloud, out in the WAN. So I feel like that kind of needs to be put to bed. I don't think that's happening anytime soon, and we've gotten corroboration from several people that that isn't the case. So hopefully that clears that up. I know that kind of made some people freak out a little bit, but uh, hopefully that helps. Another topic I wanted to cover kind of briefly today, and maybe we'll do a more in-depth dive later on in a future episode, was something that I ran into this week that consumed the greater part of my week. And that is a little feature called parameter sniffing. And that's a feature of SQL, and it sounds kind of like a silly name, but basically what it comes down to is as you run queries in SQL, you run your select statements and things like that. SQL kind of learns from your behavioral patterns and creates execution plans. And these execution plans are basically used to run that query more efficiently the next time. You can think of it almost like a cache. So if you always run a query the same way with the same set number of parameters, eventually SQL takes notice of that and says, hey, usually when Jose runs the Z customer 01 query, he passes in a parameter that says that he wants to use company 2. So SQL creates a plan with the company 2 already embedded in it and uses that to run that query in the future, just kind of as a plan ahead. Think of it as a, kind of an AI, kind of auto suggestion that SQL does for you that says, hey, I know that you usually run this query with this filter on, so I'm going to go ahead and do that filter for you and store it in the plan. That is generally a good thing. That is generally something we want our database engines to do. But we ran into an issue last week where we were heavily testing a fairly complex query that was based on parameters, or that had a lot of parameters in. And I kept running the query, and several other people that were testing the query kept running the query. And after a little bit, that query started taking longer and longer and longer to execute, up to the point that I could run the query myself in 4 seconds, and a coworker could run the same query in 17 minutes. So dug into it for quite a while, did a lot of investigations, tried to change the query around a little bit, tried to add indexes, tried to update statistics. Nothing was making a difference. I ended up going out to Brent Ozark, who's a SQL guru type person who has a very informative Slack community, and put out there my plans and had a bunch of people look at them. And it came down to parameter sniffing. So what happens is that whenever you run a BAQ in Epicor, Epicor actually wraps the entire BAQ and executes it using a procedure in SQL called SP execute SQL. And that's basically a dynamic SQL invocation. That's what allows us to drag a whole bunch of boxes around and create a workable BAQ that eventually turns into SQL. But that SQL is not natively run in the server. Instead, what Epicor does is it wraps it in a string and executes it via the SP execute procedure in SQL. That means, though, that any parameters or filters that you passed in, Epicor automatically makes a parameter in that execution. And so what happens is, as you run these queries over and over again, your SQL box will start take notice of those parameters. And if you, like me, run the same set of parameters all the time, you may end up yourself in a situation where the plan that SQL has chosen to execute your query works really well for 2 or 3 parameters, very specific parameters. But if you try to execute that query with any other parameter, the query will crater and it will just take a long time to run. So anyways, that was a lot of investigating, and what I ended up having to do was actually go through and rewrite the way that query was written, and I had to include a query hint in there that told SQL to stop trying to guess what my parameters are going to be. So there's a query hint that you can put in there. It's called option optimize for unknown, and if you put that query hint in your SQL query, what SQL will do is it will try to stop guessing the parameters, and it will just assume that you don't know what the parameter is, and it will generate the best plan it can based on that. Obviously, there is no easy way in the current release of Epicor that I'm on. There's no easy way to put in those query hints. There's a couple of hacky ways to do it, but I do know that in the next release of Epicor, 2022.2 or point 3, they are going to include the option hint as an option that's built in natively to Epicor. So you can add those hints directly on your BAQ, and that will save you from those parameter sniffing problems. But keep that in mind. If you're seeing a query that is behaving oddly, particularly a query that works really well most of the time and then other people have problems with, remember the parameter sniffing concept and do some digging, because you might find yourself in a situation that's fairly easy to fix, but takes a long time to investigate. All right, and up next we have Bart Elia, who has very graciously agreed to appear on the podcast with us to give us a little update on what he's been up to and a little history lesson. So, welcome, Bart. How's it going?
Yeah, good to see you. It's been a couple of years, no insights, and there's that little epidemic thing, and but it's kind of interesting to see your face because we chat, from time to time in Messenger, different messengers or whatever. But it's kind of fun to see a face. You know, there
Yes,
wasn't
it's
a
been a
lot of
minute.
there wasn't a lot of faces being seen there for a couple of years, so it's kind of cool.
No kidding. Yeah, I mean, I went to Insights the first time after the pandemic,
Yeah.
quote unquote, last year, and it was pretty sad, sad little Insights. This year was much better, but yeah, it's been a minute. So how are you? Give us a little update on you. So you left Epicor what 2 3 years
2 years
ago?
ago, 2 years March.
Yep.
I mean, and it's kind of funny we're talking about seeing people face to face. I'm not sure I'm showing the gray hair yet, but I got the 2 kids are adults. They're on their own careers. My son was working at Sage and he moved over to New Desic, or excuse me, New Relic. And my daughter's went from a data analyst to now she's a Scrum Master PO. Now she's a product manager at big investment firm, and so 5 grandkids and all this kind of things. And I was helping them grow up and then get into their careers and mentoring them kind of thing. And and then of course they're both geeks and they married geeks. And my wife's an ex-geek, so big geeky family. And we kind of I think it's like gravity. They all the geeks attract. Um, but so mentoring all these kids growing up, and now they're all 30 somethings heading towards 40. And I kind of missed that kind of face to face and dealing with human beings, which is one of the reasons that I started looking around at great people that I worked with at Epicor, fantastic. Loved working with some of the folks that were here in the Portland area and the Pac Northwest, and great team down in Mexico. I had a blast working with them. A group in Moscow. Ignore the politics of the last year. Good people in India, but it's I kind of missed seeing people, and that was kind of when I took a phone call and, oh, Bart, we want cloud enable, moving to a cloud enablement. I was thinking maybe a startup or something, and some little $5 billion company calls and says, yeah, we want you to take our flagship and move it to the cloud and help us with Azure, and kind of hard to turn that down. And right here in Portland, and hey, I can see human beings a mile down the road and jump onto the Intel light rail and take it to the back door of the building downtown, and it was great. 6 days, I got to see humans, and then so
Yeah, I can
yeah,
imagine that was
it was
quite the
kind of
shock.
like, what happened? So yeah, where'd it
Where
go?
did everybody
So
go? Yeah.
after 5 years remote as Epicor, and went back into an office for 6 days, and now I've been remote for a couple of years. And they said, hey, this is working better than having people in big offices with no cubicles and sharing germs all day long with each other. That may be a concern these days. So they closed down the local office here and let everybody work from home. Sounds like Epicor all over again. So I'm right back where I
Well,
started. But it's been fun ride. It's been a fun ride. So.
it sounds like it. So what does your
Um,
company do, if you don't mind me asking?
of all the things in the last couple of years that may be important, services to help hospital staff, from
Oh, wow. Okay.
trying to say, hey, we need to place a nurse in an emergency room, um, for whatever needs we have, or backfilling something for allergy season, or, oh, by the way, we need to rent out Chicago Bear Stadium and inject a whole bunch of people with a vaccine. And can you supply a few hundred nurses? Let alone, how do you get 500 people on planes and move them to help out a hospital, moving from around the country? A large hospital chain needs to try to get 500 staff in a location due to the COVID scenario, and we needed to provide services to them. They don't know how to get them on planes or in buses and get them fed and get them hotel rooms or stuff. And so we do a lot of support for that. And I'm learning a lot about how insanely complex the whole credentialing and legal aspects is in this industry, and how does a hospital um, manage that credentialing and stuff. Makes MRP look like a breeze. Um, um, but then other stuff, it's been um, doctor needs to. Oh
Sounds like
yeah,
MRP on
but in this case,
steroids.
really kind of literally the medical scenario. But other stuff too. It's like trying to make
Right.
hospitals more efficient. A doctor needs to have a translator because their patient speaks Vietnamese and they don't. And in the COVID scenario, you don't have the extended family able to sit in the ICU with you to have a chat. So hit a button on your iPad and pop up a translator, and they'll do the translation between them. Just lots and lots of different services that are all around trying to help out hospitals and health delivery organizations. So it's been an interesting journey, that whole last 2 years of learning a new business domain, trying to get all the move to the cloud stuff going on, everybody going to remote. Um, yeah, so it's been an interesting journey. So
I guess we'll forgive you for leaving Epicor since you're rather helping the pandemic
yeah, we've had that
relief and
we've
everything
had
else.
that
So
chat
we'll
about
we'll let it slide.
pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine and all the insanity. So it's been an interesting couple of years.
Yeah, no, we'll let it slide since your company has been helping out. Fine, fine. So let's go back a little bit. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got
Oh,
started in this whole
yeah.
ERP business and how you get started at Epicor? You were at
19
Epicor
years,
what,
19 years,
20 years and
19 years
change? 19
and four
years?
months. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, it was
yeah.
kind of interesting. You asked me about that, and looking back at the history stuff. There's my personal journey, but then there's probably more relevant would be the lead up to ERP 10 and .NET and cloud and everything, which is probably more interesting to folks. But it kind of starts with my kind of career at Epicor. I had gone through three dot bombs in a row. This is 99, 2000. Big consulting firm, 3,500 people kind of thing, and little 500-person projects for little, state-run organizations. And said, yeah, let's try a startup, and that one blew up from underneath me, and tried the next one and blew up, and another one that blew up, um, and Epicor sitting there saying, hey, we have this thing we want to work on, and this is back when Epicor was flat. This is back when we had, clientele, which is what I got hired into, and Platinum Financials and DataWorks and InfoWorks. Can't remember who else was around back then. But let's merge them together as a single company and get them on a single common platform. The original ICE. You remember was it Internet Component Environment or whatever it was? I got hired on as part of that process, and that's what ended up being E4SE eventually. Um, and somewhere along the lines, 2001, May 2001 was kind of a bad economy for everybody in the industry because of the whole dot bomb blow up in 2001. So Epicor definitely went through that. So we went to visualized. So we went back. Epicor, you do your CRM and help desk thing, and the E4SE guys went off to do the management aspect. Can't remember what they called it. PRM, whatever it stood for. I can't remember. Partner relationship management. I don't remember. Project relationship management. I don't remember. It was large company support, and Vantage kept on doing their thing. Yeah, it was back in the Vantage 6 days, and Epicor or clientele. Epicor did that kind of split, so we all kind of specialized for a couple of years. Clientele went off. We were successful. Got eWeek product of the year. It was a great flag. I still have the pyramid around here somewhere. Great award. And E4SE came out. It had a lot of great technology, but it was interesting because, and this is one of the big struggles that I think the industry has. Clientele had their model, what they needed to solve. It was really a rapid application development environment, kind of help desk, very toolkit centric. Now you think about BPM or BAQs and functions and stuff like this. This is back in, we started writing this stuff, ICE and E4SE and clientele, and this was C# and .NET beta. I mean, we started writing production code on beta 1. So really early days. And clientele was really successful. E4SE came out really challenging a lot of distributed model computing, which was really cool. And then Vantage is sitting here on Vantage 6 and saying, what are we going to do? They looked at the products and, well, we can tackle the server side, Progress and 4GL and all that stuff. We can tackle the client side. They went client side first. So they took the clientele model, made it a hell of a lot better because they had like 3 times the staff. It kind of helps to have more bodies on a project. So they did a lot of great things and came out with, Vantage 8. And then the evolution into Epicor 9. And during that time frame, I had moved out of clientele, and we started the research and development group. Epicor was looking at a huge merger at the time that fell apart, never happened. But we wanted to form an R&D group to start working with that merger, and that's where Eric Johnson was in charge of that. If you remember Eric, chief architect.
Yes.
And we were trying to figure out, what would this next generation architecture be? And so he had a lot of stuff, a lot of greenfield stuff. I think he called it Green Day or Greenfield or something. I can't remember what his project name was. And we were playing around with different ideas and whatever. And then I was doing stuff like early Epicor data aggregator, I think they called it, which ended up being like BAQs.
Okay.
We did the Epicor portal for a while there, and Information Worker came along, and I listened to chat with Tim Shoemaker about how does Epicor go ahead and come up with ideas, and it was interesting for me because back then we did a lot of these yearly or bi-yearly executive briefing councils or EBCs with the Epicor execs and Microsoft execs, and we did it with other companies too, but Microsoft was the bigger thing. they say, hey, these are the new cool things coming along, and I'd come back from that, or our execs would come back from that and say, hey, Bart, you know, technology foo, what would you do with it? Spend a week or two coming up with proposals, maybe
Right.
do some proof of concept spikes and kind of show them off what it could be useful for, and make a pitch, and it'd be lots of times, oh, okay, that's nice. Other times it'd be, hey, that sounds cool. Why don't you go ahead and build a team, go deliver that. And that was like information worker, for example. Hey, Bart, go hire, half a dozen people. Let's build a product. Let's get it to market. And I played, architect and dev manager over it, and then bring it to market and groom the people behind me. And you probably know some of the personalities behind me that you work with still today. And they take over and take it to market and babysit it for a while, and I'd go back, lather, rinse, and repeat on the next project. During one of those, um, we were in Moscow visiting the team over there, and one of the conversations came up about how, you know, Epicor 9 being built on Progress. I mean, there were some scale problems, and I'm not trying to denigrate Progress and 4GL or whatever. Fine stack for an embedded database and whatever. But if you're looking at a distributed system, if you're looking at really super scale and looking at, we wanted to go more towards cloud, it just wasn't going to work on that side, on the technical side. The business relationship wasn't fantastic on the business relationship side. They're not a company like Microsoft that can go ahead and support a business like we wanted to grow. And then quite honestly, let's throw some financials in here. Let's cut through the tech and the whatever. But if you look at Wall Street, and this is back when Epicor was a public company, you look at Wall Street and they're looking at the valuation of how much is Epicor worth, and they're saying, oh, you guys' flagship product is built on Progress. What's
Right.
Progress?
What's progress?
Um, and so
Exactly.
there's a risk management as an executive. You have to put on that risk management hat and say, are we building with the right partners? And it's not a denigration of Progress or 4GL or anything. It's just a reality that if you're going to decide to take a partner like that, you got to make sure you have a trusted partner. And that was something that's a very serious chat. Um, but this kind of stuff is just normal in the industry. And we had a lot. I mean, we had a lot of good people back then in Epicor, and we still do. As far as you still do, as far as I'm concerned. As far as I'm concerned, that they think through this stuff and they're trying to do the right thing. So we had a meeting over in Moscow, and certain VPs and chief architects and myself were sitting around, and they just came out with this newfangled thing that we were in the adoption program and preview design review of this newfangled thing, entity framework and WCF and God, what else? The workflow engine and whatever. And I was like, looking at Link and looking at 4GL, it's not that bad. A lot of the patterns are similar. And I turned to the VP. I said, "Can't be that hard to do." And that was
Oh
my
boy.
next 12 years right there. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Words you
well,
will
it,
live
it,
to
it was
regret.
regret on one side, but it was a blast.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I'm sure it
and
was.
no, it wasn't the vodka involved that made that commentary. Um, but yeah, it was. That's where it came from. Is we just said, that it's not that different, and then Eric and I started working on that for the next couple of years. What would a new architecture look like? Although it was kind of funny, we did the POC and we were showing some people some performance numbers, and it wasn't just us. There was a couple others that helped out part time because I was no 4GL expert by any means. And so we did the POC and it kind of went dark for 6 weeks, and I'm like, what's happening? And I was like, maybe I should start listening to phone calls on recruiters or something. I was kind of nervous, and we're sitting around the office at one of the cross company meetings, like every company does big company meeting. And I'm sitting there going, well, I wonder if I have a job. I wonder what the big announcement's going to be today. And the CEO at the time, was it Mark Duffel? I can't remember. Said, yes, and we're all going to be building this new ICE 3 thing on all the stuff I was doing. And everybody around the table was, hey, congratulations, Bart. Why didn't you tell me? And I said, I didn't know, So uh, it was just kind of a funny day. It was kind of a funny day. But then, cranking out the early days of the blending of some E4SE stuff, some clientele stuff, a lot of Vantage stuff, because Vantage had a ton of functionality, and E10, E9 at the time, and then the early days of what are we going to make E10. There was a while there we were trying to do a kind of a transpiler. So we were writing the 4GL, we were writing E9, and we were taking it and passing it through the sausage grinder that you probably know and love. A lot of people have gone through that sausage grinder thing, and spitting out, C# and SQL. And it was actually a fun time. We were talking about possibly doing that as if we could get that engine working. Instead of doing a one-time cutover, maybe we can do a transpile and do both product lines in parallel. We were playing around with different ideas back then. That luckily we reduced scope down to let's just do a cutover one day and we'll make E10 kind of thing. But we were talking about in parallel. In fact, what's that what's the data DLL? The data 910100 DLL.
Oh yeah.
Where that came
E905,
from is we
right?
were
Yeah.
thinking we were going to do a transpile to build 9.1 and in 4GL and in .NET at the same time. That's where that name came from. So funny anecdote.
Got it. That makes
And
sense.
then it just kind of got stuck there. So, uh,
Yeah, I think I'm glad that it was a one-time code over
yeah, it would have been
than
crazy.
anything
Would have been
else. But
crazy. Um,
yeah, I did. You guys released some kind of web tool where you could put in 4GL and you hit a button and it did the whole
that was
thing
the
and it
sausage
spit
grinder.
out some
Yeah, we
quasi
wrapped
C
we wrapped
sharp.
an app service over the
Right,
top of
right,
that.
right. And we used it.
Yeah,
You used it for a little bit at the beginning because once you guys went to 10,
yeah.
the rest of us had to catch up, right? Because we were over in 9 land, so we had to do a lot of like, well, let's learn C sharp now and let's
Mhm.
learn link. What is link? And so as part of that, we used that like you mentioned, that sausage grinder, and I remember used it for a little while, and then once you start picking up the language, you start using it again, and you're like, ooh, that doesn't.
That's not how I want. And to be fair, that sausage grinder was actually 3 stages. We had a prep stage where we prepped um, the 4GL because you had old includes and macros and stuff like that, right? And we need to flatten that out because C# looked at that and said, "What the heck's that? This I'm not C++. I don't do macros." So we inline all that stuff, and then we'd go ahead and pass it through the sausage grinder, which you probably saw, and then afterwards we had a sanitizing. We'd go through and sanitize and clean up clean up the output. So that was fun, um, and in that cleanup process, it was kind of interesting that we were able to then take a look at the results and say, okay, something didn't generate well. Um, it's kind of goofy. What's going on here? I'm not sure why it looks this way in C#. This is a bug, kind of thing. And we'd go and sit down with the gurus in 4GL, and there are a lot of good people that were really strong in 4GL and say, hey, what's going on here? And, why is it doing this stuff? They'd look at the 4GL and what would be like 9.0, whatever the heck it was. And they say, yeah, this is a bug in our code. And so the process of building 10 and generating from 9 into 10 was finding a bunch of 9x bugs. So that was kind of fun. So we were able to get that last 9x release that we did very stable overall because of the parallel C# effort that was going on. So it was kind of cute. Talk about unit testing or automated testing, and it was kind of fun project for doing that kind of stuff. So, anyways,
Yeah, that was a
it
heck
was
of an
it
undertaking.
was
I mean, I wasn't involved on it then, and I was definitely on the customer side, but I could see the gears turning, and I could see
yeah,
the
and
releases
a lot of
coming.
good
So
people, a lot of good people,
that's pretty
and
crazy.
I I was very blessed to work with a lot of those people, and most of them very shy. They didn't like getting out of their little shell, and so I was when you guys came along in the EpiUser world, I was able to show a lot of their efforts and represent that. So that was always a really um, you know nice time to be able to show these people's skill sets, try to drag them out into front of customers because you guys don't bite that much, um, and try to
Right.
get them to go ahead and show off some of their work. Um, you know, we were just chatting before we started the recording. REST. And my REST novel that I still get pings on EpiUsers and stuff. Um, that was some really smart people doing some great work. But I was acting as product owner over that, and I kept on answering the same damn beta questions over and over and over again. It was like my email was just 80%, you know, um, REST questions, and they weren't all from you and Jose, or you and Hasso, excuse me. And so I finally was, after a week in San Diego meeting with Eric, I was flying back, and on the plane, I'm going to bang this damn thing out because I'm so sick and tired of answering the same darn questions. And when I landed, I hit upload, and then that REST novel's still there. So that was just me ranting. So
Yeah, it is, and it's crazy because it still has a lot of activity. Like you said, you get pings on it all the time. I get pings on it all the time. People go through and read it and view it. I mean, that thing has been out there. That thing has over 30,000 individual views and over 200 replies.
biggest work I've ever made. But
So yeah, I think it's a pretty nice piece of work. And the nice thing is that it's still relevant today, even though Epicor has moved on to REST v2 and things like that. The core concepts that you outline on that novel and things like that are still fully applicable. And now Epicor has dropped the WCF and he's moved fully to REST, which is something that I'm super excited about and fully on board
yeah, that
with.
was that was that
Um,
was discussed. We were
but
talking about gRPC
that's
there
still a
for a
good.
while, and I know we did some POCs on some different models there. But the serialization, distributed systems, the interop, which is the point of REST, and I'm really big in the REST world now, with Hadios and
Mhm.
maturity model and stuff, um, in my new world. So it's something that's very relevant to me and very very close to my heart. But the REST work was something that we really needed. Um, I'm a big distributed person, distributed systems person. That's my background. I never saw a client server system until I was 10 years into my career. I started with distributed
Oh
robotics
wow.
and data acquisition systems, VMS, Unix, Windows in the early days, Alpha NT, back in the day. So a lot of different data acquisition, controlling these robotic systems, these chemical analyzers, doing analysis, number crunching, submitting it to Oracle DB and stuff like that. But a lot of different technologies, a lot of different operating systems and stuff, but very distributed around. And then, the next system was I went into developer tools for a while, early version control, PVCS, did the porting off of Windows to other platforms of PVCS. That was fun for a year. Um, Big consulting firm. I show up. We're going to teach you how to do, enterprise computing, and it was this client server system. I'm like, what is this? A front end against the database, huh? What about risk and scale and everything else? And it was just interesting. So REST plays to my heart in that regards, um, as well as webhooks or functions. We went into the function stuff. So it was interesting to watch my early training in coming out of school and learning this newfangled internet thing, and Mosaic browser point 7, which was my first browser. The early days of that kind of stuff, and then distributed, just how you build things. How else are you going to scale and deal with the internet and all? Distributed systems, and so many people are just used to simple forms over data kind of mindset. That's gotten us a long way, and there's nothing wrong with that for simplified systems. But if you're building big systems, you got to think about a distributed system. You got to think about domain services, domain driven design, and you need to build think about those kinds of things. So it was just very interesting that along comes REST, and this kind of took off. It was great, and the young lady, and her well, in charge of the REST stuff, she was brilliant on that. Um, Made and the Restafarians that are out there that are criticizing the shape of the REST stuff, they're right, but we needed something, and we couldn't spend 2 years going dark, and so she made the right trade-offs to go ahead and get it to market because you had to. And nothing but kudos to her for pushing that across the finish line. Um, but we needed to start down that path, and I believe they were talking about doing some improvements on that and doing some real, gets should be gets, you know, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Did they?
And they fixed that.
No.
Yeah, so they did. Yeah, so REST v2 has fixed a lot of those things. So your get by IDs are no longer a post; it is now an actual get. They still have the deprecated
Yeah.
method there, which I
Oh
appreciate
yeah.
for all my legacy, right? But they did go above and beyond there, and they made a bunch of changes to that. They also incorporated multi-company more
Good.
directly into the REST interface, simpler, right? You used to have a
Oh
header
yeah,
in
that
place and all
happened
this
just
other
before I
stuff.
left.
Now it's
Yeah,
just part
yeah.
of the
That
URL.
helped us a lot in the
Yep,
function
yep.
stuff too.
URL
Yeah.
signature. It's so much better. They introduce scope. They introduce API keys. So they are leaps and bounds ahead of where the REST v1 was. But it just that baby kind of grew up now into a very nice looking young man kind of thing. And it's
You
just
should you
it's
you
it's
should you're
it's
being very
nice to see
sexist there.
where
You should probably
where it
say
has
young
gone.
lady because of the guru that was in charge of that. You should call it a nice. That young lady grew into
That
a
is
very
true.
beautiful
That's true.
woman. So
There you go. That is accurate. Yes, yes. So now it's just the possibilities are endless. They just integrated with this new external
yeah,
platform called Workato. I think
yeah.
you heard about that on the last episode, and it's all REST based. I mean, I dropped it in and gave it a URL, and it's working, right? And that is the beauty
Yep.
the beauty of REST. So thank you for kind of championing that originally and getting it that way because right before you started working on the REST as a REST owner, I started doing things like wrapping the WCF into REST endpoints for myself, right? Because I remember I was trying to work on that
Yeah, I remember
Alexa
that.
project that
I
I
remember
showed
that.
you, the Alexa skills or whatever, and I pinged you and I was like, oh, look what I did, and you're like, oh, REST is coming. Hold on, let me show you some stuff. And so we talked about what was potentially coming down the road and things like that, and it got me super excited. But at the beginning, the customers, we were kind
Yeah.
of starting to clamor for that the whole REST interface because the rest of the world was there already for the most part. All your devices, all your
Yep.
cloud services, they all had REST endpoints and hooks. And at the time, Epicor was still very WCF, heavy, and there was no REST endpoint. So that was a huge leap, I think,
And that's
for the
that's
whole
an interesting
platform.
conversation just about the whole. Do you own this domain and everything fits inside of the box, or are you a good citizen within the ecosystem of a business? And that's one of the reasons I left Epicor was I wanted to get more hands-on on actually delivering, and I deal with internal delivery every day. I have 300 plus servers that I go through and have to babysit all day long. And I wanted to get that more hands-on stuff as opposed to kind of being at arm's length. So I am enjoying that more hands-on aspect of, the trade-offs of, do I go to Kubernetes and containers in the cloud? Do I use Azure App Services and functions? Um, you know, we have both, two different product lines I'm on, um, and they're
Wow.
great. I mean, Kubernetes is fantastic technology, but I'm still babysitting operating systems. It's a hell of a lot better than a VM or raw metal, but I'm still babysitting operating systems. Um, when something breaks and solar winds or whatever the heck pops, it's you're all hands on deck fixing that stuff. I'm over in functions and app services on another product line and went, oh, that's nice, and went back to work. So there's interesting trade-offs you can get into about what's appropriate for what your business need is, and I'm enjoying that more hands-on aspect of that. Um, Definitely enjoying the app services and the functions aspect. Um, no operating systems in the cloud is kind of one of my jokingly mantras, and it works really really well. Um, I don't have well, we have a team that does nothing but patching all day long. There's an entire team we pay to install KB articles and all the gazillions of servers we have,
Wow.
um, but not on the app services and functions. There's nothing there. Microsoft does that. We rent that. Now, am I hard coding that a
Right.
little bit to Microsoft? Sort of. I can take I can take an IIS app and make it an app service. I can take an app service and make it an IIS instance and put it inside of a container if I needed to. So we're not really locked in. You got to be smart about that. Functions a little bit more difficult, but not horribly. Um, But yeah, it's been an interesting journey of that hands-on kind of aspect and pretty quick turnarounds. Um, so, anyways,
And is that where you see the industry going? Like, recently there was a bunch of rumors that Epicor was going to force everyone to go to cloud services and things like that. And they've
oh,
dispelled that for
Epicor,
now.
yeah, that was.
And I know you don't have
I
any
saw that
ace.
and I kind of
Right, right,
laughed. I
right.
was
Yeah,
like,
yeah. I know you
really?
don't have any
You want to
ace.
piss off 80% of your
Yeah, yeah,
customer
yeah.
base? Epicor's smarter than that. They
Yeah,
were back then and they are now. So,
exactly. Um, but do you see the industry in general heading in that direction where everything is kind of going away from metal and just going straight to services and middle software and things like that?
I
Is
don't
that
think
where
we're
you're
going to go to
seeing
one
the trend?
target in goal. I think that's the big thing. I don't see a single destination here. I really don't. When you get into, um, you're not going to have general purpose. One thing does everything. I think you're going to get into more specialized areas. Um, do your staff? I know your condolences. You're now a manager. I heard. Um, um,
Thank you.
is your team have every skill across the entire breadth, or do you have specialists in certain things? Our industry is specialized. The people that think that you can hire any generalist off the street and put them into an IT role and have them do it is just naive. Um, and I think the same thing about these kinds of services that we host or rent. Um, whether we're and it comes down to the business. I mean, that's what as us geeks, we forget about the fact that this is a business decision. Am I going to pay for staff that knows how to keep a server up and running? Um, am I going to pay for staff that knows how to monitor these instances in my data center because I can make it more efficient because I have staff and I'm going to invest that money in that? Um, that's a business decision. That's not because I like this technology or that technology. And a lot of times in industry, IT, we kind of forget that. We get fall in love and we have a religion towards the technology and everything, all I know is Kubernetes, so everything has to be Kubernetes, or all I know is X. And that's something that the industry needs to wake up about, quite honestly, and it needs to grow and mature. As you know, I just saw you guys changed the screen layout here, so I apologize. I just saw more of my construction behind me. Um, yeah,
Oh, you're
the whole
fine.
house is going through a remodel, by the way. Kitchen gutted due to a dishwasher leak and all new windows going in. And of course, we have to repaint the whole house now that we redid the kitchen. So that's been my COVID project. Um, yeah.
Oof.
Um,
I
but
feel you
anyways,
there.
yeah, I think that's just an interesting thing that so many people fall in love with a technology as opposed to saying, "This is my business domain. This is my problem. This is my available staff, or how I can approach the problem and the trade-offs." And you know, dealing with my dot bomb experience in the late 90s, back then a lot of the dot bombs, it was like, I'm going to go buy, Solaris, and I'm going to go buy a BEA, I'm going to go buy Oracle. I'm out 250, $1,000 before I even write a line of code, because that's what you have to do anything. Well, no, no. There's other options, and they just that naivete from an architecture standpoint, from a um, product ownership, product management kind of stuff, that disappoints me. It disappoints me. So
Yeah, I tend to agree. I always have the approach of, right tool for the right job. And just because you only know C sharp doesn't mean that you have to do
yeah,
C sharp for
exactly.
everything, right? That was something that kind of, has come as a shock for some people that are like, oh, you guys do Angular and you guys do C sharp and you guys do PHP and you guys do this and that and the other in different environments. I was like, yes, we do all those things, not individually, but each person does their own thing based on what they know and what the skill set they have. Like you said, some of my staff can do Angular, some of my staff cannot. That's fine, right? But we don't tie ourselves to a specific set of frameworks or languages just because that's all that we have available in that corner of the world and that's the only thing we're going to do no matter what, right? You have to be able to evolve and you have to be able to say, hey, listen, this doesn't work for that. We need to do a slightly different approach here, and that works better. And you're right. People, when you're hiring people out there, they start looking for those unicorns that can do it all, and that's not really
Yeah,
realistic, right? You cannot, you know, there are a handful of people out there that can do almost everything. But
They're not.
it
I can't,
also makes
or
me
you can't
think
afford
about the
them.
whole,
You can't afford them. Would be
exactly.
more likely.
Or you can, well, not only that, but the whole concept of jack of all trades,
Yeah.
master of none, right? If you can do everything, then can you really do everything 100%
And now
right,
take that.
right?
You're just
And
so far you've talked about the coding. Now start talking about the
right,
infrastructure, about the DevOps, about the and that's something that's very passionate to me is infrastructure as code, immutable infrastructure. Um, those are some things that we were starting to really push on heavily before I left. Um, the 3-day Epicor SaaS upgrades kind of thing, driving me crazy. And we did a lot of cool tech around bringing improvements to that, so that stand up the new data center next to the other one. Test everything out, and flip the switch on the DNS to point to the new servers. And if all heck breaks loose, point to the old one. If it works, you run it for a certain point of time. That old data center, it's in Azure, it's rented VMs, delete it. And that kind of mindset of always forward moving architecture, always building the entire data center. That's a mindset that I'm using now as well, a lot more hands-on than I did before. Had some really sharp people working on that for me at Epicor. Um, and one anecdotal on that lines is we were investigating some Azure technology, and we were doing a scale test, and we said, hey, good partnership with Microsoft as always. We'll test out this new tech while we're doing our scale test to see if it performs, because they were coming out some new stuff in Azure SQL, and let's give it a shot at it and see if it works. So we had our 200 boxes stood up to this incredible collection of servers and stuff to run all this stuff. We had it all up and running. We were running our tests, and they come in on day 4 or something of the 2-week thing. I can't remember what it was. And they say, okay, we're ready. You run all your other tests. Can you run this Azure SQL thing for us now? Sure, we're ready. What's the connection string? Whatever. They said, here. Wait, you're in Central? We deployed everything in US East. You know,
oh no.
and how big of an instance? We got like 221 boxes. I don't remember what it was. I'm making that up. Um, and the guy in charge of it's like, no problem. Makes one parameter change, clicks the button. Let's go do lunch. Come back from lunch, and all the 221 boxes were stood up in the east. That is, infrastructure as code. An entire data center via script. And delete the old one
Right,
because you're done with it, and send it back to Microsoft.
right.
That kind of mindset is where we're going to see efficiencies in this industry. That's the kind of stuff that we need to be able to do. I need to pilot something. I'm going to script it up, and manage it. Now, the other interesting thing about this in my new life is it's healthcare related. A lot more control over compliance and stuff that I had to deal with hands-on at Epicor. And it's really interesting that now I can go ahead and say, I have a PR on deploying a new server. I have a PR for making a change to a server from a code perspective. I can check that code in that happens to be make this SKU change on a bigger box, more CPUs, or a SKU or a PR check-in to say I'm opening a hole for this in the firewall for this. So it's very interesting that I have all the blame, literally, get blame on a code
Yeah,
change.
yeah.
I got get
Get blame.
blame
Yeah,
on my data center now. It's really cool. Which
yeah. That's pretty awesome. The fact that you can have DevOps and all that on a
yeah,
code now,
yeah,
and
yeah,
just look at it, and that's pretty amazing. I actually just last week so we're in Azure at my daytime job. We're on Azure, but we're on Azure,
yeah,
renting VMs and spinning up our own servers. But we're not quite yet,
yeah,
serverless. Epicor
no,
doesn't quite support that in on-prem and other issues there. But one of the things that we're doing replication, and so we're doing database replication, and we decided, hey, we're going to replicate. Let's go ahead and replicate to a serverless Azure SQL instance. And so we did that I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 months ago. It's been working flawlessly, no problem, no issues, great. Then we decided to bring in Power BI, and so we brought on Power BI and we put Power BI and hooked it onto our replication instance, right? And everything's working fine. Then my Power BI user tells me I want more live data. Now, don't get me into the argument that this is a BI system and you don't need live data, but let's just go with the fact that they wanted liver data. So we decided to do Power BI refreshes every 2 hours. And so I had deployed my Azure replication into my serverless SQL with the bare minimum specs that I could put. It was a tiny little box. It had 2 cores, no RAM, and a couple hundred gigs of hard drive space, and that was working perfectly fine for our simple replication system. But when I started pulling in 100 plus gigs of data every 2 hours on Power BI to refresh my data set, that CPU pegged, the memory pegged. It was just
Yep.
unusable. It was causing delays all over. It was causing a nightmare, right? We were running reports. The reports were taking ages, and I would go into the portal, that azure.com, and look at the database instance, and I could see CPU 100%, IOPS 100%, all these things. And I was like, oh, how am I going to fix this? What am I doing? I'm used to like the
Yeah.
server
Oh,
mentality, right? So I was like, well,
yeah.
I'm gonna have to, I'm gonna have to go log into the server and I don't know. I guess I can add more RAM to the VM instance, but then I gotta reboot, and that's not gonna work. So I'm freaking out a little bit, and then I realized, wait, this is a serverless instance. So I literally just went into the server, went to the options, and I went upgrade to the next level up, which doubles my CPU, double my RAM, double my IOPS. Hit OK. And in 15 seconds, I actually was watching the
Oof.
CPU go from 100% to 10% and stayed there, right? And now everything is doing what we need, right? And it was that moment that it kind of clicked in my head that this is really, like you said, infrastructure as code. I could change my hardware without having to change any actual hardware, and it did not have any downtime. It actually fixed my problem in the middle of the day without any
And
issues,
that
and
plays too,
it
by the
was
way,
kind of mind
to
blowing.
um, I mentioned the compliance and the audit trail aspect, but also you get into the governance from the cost angle. Um, I've done one code review in my life with my CFO, not at Epicor. This is before Epicor. Um, but code reviews in front of CFOs are not fun. Um, but thinking about now, why are we changing the data center and what are we costing on stuff is a very interesting conversation. Another thing I really love about the cloud is I have heard that once in a while there's subsystems within Epicor that are underperforming on performance. Um, and you may need extra CPUs or RAM to perform whatever function that you're talking about here. And you smile. And I know I remember these stories many a time. Um, the wonderful thing about cloud is that you're changing that whole struggle about, Epicor needs to go ahead and build a new feature for this particular customer so we can make a sale, to now in the cloud, you have a scenario where it's costing us as a SaaS company that this poor performing code um, is costing us X dollars a month. So this underperforming code means we need to go up to that next level. As I like to jokingly call it, slide the slider on increasing the SKU and watch your credit card melt. Um, so that kind of sliding the slider to do that stuff. Um, but that ability now that you have to tie that back to poor code. So now you're changing the conversation with your business folks, and you've written bad code or you've inherited bad code, and you just are bitching that you want it to be better as an engineer, as a coder, as a programmer. This is not correct, and we can do this better and more efficiently. Business looks at that and says, okay, Jose, I'm paying you, what, probably $10, $20 an hour. Um, um, how long would it take you to go fix that? How much is it going to cost me of your time to go fix that versus other issues? Versus paying for $1,000 for a new piece of hardware or an improved hardware. That's a math equation. You're putting numbers in front of a business leader now to make a business decision, a cost perspective of, it's going to cost us X dollars to fix it, it's going to cost us X dollars to keep on limping it along and paying for extra hardware. You can put that dollar sign in front of business leaders and they get that. And so as the engineer, it's helped me to go ahead and say, hey, this is crappy code, and this is the cost just on running it, let alone the cost of trying to maintain and evolve it and do time to market on improvements and stuff, additional features. There's that whole area as well to kind of talk about. But it really puts the conversation about better quality into a cost perspective. And it also kind of kicks me in the butt and says, Bart, you're bitching about this and it's not as good as it could be. But in the grand scheme of things, it's costing us $15 a month, and I really don't care. So,
Right. Yeah, it becomes a
yeah,
cost-benefit
and it's
analysis at
real
that
easy
point, right?
ROI. So those are the kinds of things as I move into more, as I mentor others moving into more architectural roles, to start thinking about that kind of stuff. You start thinking about the cost benefits of things as opposed to just the pure right way of doing things. That's hard in our industry, and we're still figuring out how to do software development. I mean, we're a young science. My dad did big civil projects, and when you start talking to him about building things, it's bridges and a single piece of metal that's the new SFO terminal or something like that. Little pieces of metal to him were 1 foot wide, 8 foot tall, and 40 foot long. And that was a little piece of metal for him. When you start dealing with stuff like that, I mean, they've been building Roman roads, Egyptian pyramids,
Right.
aqueducts for thousands of years. We're still in this software industry. We're still in our diapers. We're still, I don't even know if we're
Oh yeah.
waddling, waddling around as toddlers yet. So, we're still trying to figure this stuff out, and you got to stop and, put that perspective on as much as you get arrogant or get invested in a religion about something. You got to stop and breathe and say, this is this is not that important. We're still figuring this stuff out. Plus one from yesterday is one of the things I like to say is we're going to be in a continual improvement mode. So, anyways.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that kind of that kind of segues back into like the different architectural changes and things that happen in the software itself. Like going
Yeah.
back to the Epicor thing, they're going away from custom code, they're going away from all that stuff. They're going to codeless or drag and drop customizations and things like that. And it's difficult for us old timers, quote unquote, that have been doing custom code. We have been doing custom code for
Yeah.
nearly 20 years, and all of a sudden they're taking my toy away, right? And you want to fight that. You want to fight that so hard, but then you have to stand and think about the cost benefit analysis of
Pick your battles.
what does it mean when I have all this pile of custom code. I have this pile of custom code that now I have to babysit and carry through all the way through on every upgrade, and
Yep.
every time it breaks I have to spend time and money and things like that. Or I could just let the code go to a codeless
Yep.
or some kind of other architectural environment that allows me to step away from babysitting that piece of code and do something perhaps more important. And that took quite a while for me to grasp, and I can imagine the rest of the industry feels that way too. Giving up some of that control and allowing some of these new technologies to take hold, it's definitely a difficult task, but something that we should all be moving in the
Anyways.
right direction, I think.
Anything else? Otherwise, you're done with me?
I think we got 50 minutes out of
Oh,
you, and I
wow.
think that I can't afford anymore. So,
Yeah, you probably got a few more
so
cycles to get some other higher level of whatever you're posting this on. So, anyways.
oh yeah, no, we're good. Thank you so much, Bart, for taking the time. We miss you in the community. We really appreciate all you did for us and the Epicor world, and you were instrumental in getting the Epicor employees to participate in the forum, and that has made a huge difference. I still all the time, message somebody on the forum directly or post something and tag somebody directly at Epicor, and they're engaged and they respond. And that a lot of that had to do with you and Eric, who we also miss greatly. So thank you so much for all you've done for the
It's the
community,
one,
and
it's
hopefully,
the,
we'll
I mean, a lot of good people. I still have friends there and stuff, but the one thing I
yeah.
do miss about the job is dealing with folks like you and dealing with the customer. That was the best part of the day. I'm a very much an open source and, crowd community kind of person in my thinking. And that was the one thing to walk away from that was annoying, because I miss you guys. So.
Yeah, we miss you too, and we'll keep in touch. We'll bring you back in a little bit. Maybe you can give us some of the new cool features you're working on,
Playing
and we'll talk
around
a
some
little bit
cool
more
things in
stuff. But
Azure in preview mode right now that I'm under NDA, but
yeah,
maybe we can talk
oh,
about that
see,
when it comes public in a year or so. So
There you go. Sounds great. Thank you, Bart. Appreciate you.
Take care, guys.
All right. Hopefully, you guys enjoy that conversation as much as I did. It was great to hear from Bart and know that he's doing well and enjoying his work. And it was nice to hear some of the history there from, the early days of Epicor all the way through the Epicor 9 to 10 conversion and so on. I think that's it for us today. If you have any suggestions for the podcast or any guests you'd like us to try and get, send us an email directly at podcasts at epiusers.help, or reply on the post that we're going to share along with this episode. Next time, I'll be back with my regular co host, Bryan, or maybe a different co host. In the meantime, I hope you all have a great week. See you next time.